Hi, and welcome back to the series on planning. So in this mini lecture, we're actually going to start to unpack some of the planning tools and techniques that are used in organisations in order to advance our thinking. So we start the process by actually looking at forecasting. Now, in our historical Foundations of Management lectures, we heard of this word coming out of our behavioural approaches, where we start saying, okay, we need to know where we're going in the future in order to predict what we need to do now, right? So, and this is all about making assumptions, about using data in order to say, okay, I know that on this date, I need to order more tissues for our store because of flu season. It's that simple. So based on past behavior, I'm going to predict future behavior. But there are different types of forecasting. So we can use qualitative forecasting, and qualitative forecasting allows us to use expert opinion. All right, not just data, it's about being able to use expert opinion. And that's important because what we tend to find is that sometimes our experts actually end up knowing something different to what our data is showing. And that may be because of one of the changing environmental conditions that we're facing. And therefore we want to learn from others. The second type of forecasting is our quantitative forecasting, which is simply using our mathematical and statistical analysis skills, using our data to predict future events. So we could actually see where our peaks and our troughs are in our service delivery, and as a result, be able to improve the way in which we do things. All right, so a forecast is simply a vision of the future. It's about making assumptions about what's going to happen in order to be able to predict what we need now to meet that need. In business also, we talk about contingency planning. So contingency planning is identifying an alternate course of action that can be implemented if and when an original plan proves inadequate because of changing circumstances. So a contingency plan could be, what do I do right now, given the floods up in North Queensland, to my employees? Now they can't get to work, so do I let them work from home, assuming they have power and electricity? Do I require them to work off-site, or do I require them to not work at all? All right, so as an organisation, you make that call. And that's important because sometimes we can't make the decision that they're not working at all. As ruthless as that sounds, we need some employees on the ground, and therefore, depending on the level of employee, we need to identify alternative courses of actions for that employee on that day. Now, that's a simple example. But what we tend to find is that sometimes our alternatives become the norm. And that's where we talk about these trigger points. So trigger points are things that say, you know what, our current plan, our current way of working doesn't work. All right, we need to start trialing alternative ways because I'm sick of coming back and doing this alternative course of action because your current process isn't working. So in organisations, we constantly reflect on the way in which we do business. And that's really important because our external environments change all the time. So contingency planning is used quite regularly. Scenario planning is also used. So scenario planning is that long-term version of contingency planning. All right, so it's saying, okay, if North Queensland continuously gets floods and I still need to do business up there because it's, you know, an important part of Australia, how do I do it? What's my actual plan? Because then it becomes more than a contingency plan. It becomes a long-term version of that. It becomes a scenario plan. So if X happens, then we do B. If B happens, then we come and do C. All right? Because it starts to condition the organisation to think and remain better prepared than others in order to cater for these constant environmental conditions, right? So we're not going to get those future shocks. So we want to be able to scenario plan and have that pretty much embedded within our organisation as a norm and review them regularly. So some of the things that we can actually plan for are terrorism. Now, 10 years ago, we would not be talking about, well, 20 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about terrorism at all. However, now we have to plan for it. Climate change wasn't necessarily an issue 25 years ago. Now we have to think about it. Sustainable development, human rights and biodiversity. How does refugees impact the way I do business now? How does the fact that the Prime Minister in Australia keeps changing impact the way I'm doing now? So what's the geopolitical change and how does that change my day-to-day operation? These are the things that managers need to think about. The other type of plan is called benchmarking. So benchmarking is our ability to externally compare where we're at. All right? So as an organisation, we are currently on the top 10 business schools in Australia. But without that comparator, we actually don't know that. Right? And that's really important information to us, because then we can become the top 5 or the top 2, which is our aim, to be the top business school in Australia. So benchmarking is absolutely critical to be able to find out what other people are doing and then plan how we're going to incorporate what they're doing into our organisation. Okay, so we're starting to look at, all right, so in the University of Sydney, they're doing X, Y, and Z. By doing X, Y, and Z, they've actually changed this about their organisation. So let's start doing that and really not reinvent the wheel, but see how it applies to us. Another tool we used is this thing called management by objective. So management by objectives is this structured process of communication where a manager or a team leader works with staff to jointly set performance objectives and review them. So they have this agreement that exists between managers and employees, and they're talking about performance objectives for a given period of time. They plan through how they're going to accomplish them. They have standards of management, and they have procedures for reviewing performance results. So, how does this work in relation to management by objectives? All right. So, both parties in a management by objective agreement are supposed to work together to fulfill the terms of the agreement. So, they start to justify the plan. They individually act, and then they justify, jointly control. So they jointly plan, they individually act, and then they jointly control. And they talk to each other. And that's really important, because what we're really saying is that if I'm not jointly coming up with those objectives, standards, and measurement actions, then the individual can't act in the way in which I think, or we think in this case, they should be acting. So we actually both review, so it gets more of an objective outcome, which is why it's called performance objectives, right? So there are 3 types of objectives that may be specified in an MBO contract. These are improvement objectives. So basically, how am I going to improve performance in a specific way? Personal development. So how am I going to help that employee actually develop? And then some of them even include a maintenance objectives. All right, so if someone actually just wants to maintain their performance and they don't want to improve in any way, shape, or form because they don't have to, then there's a situation for that too. Managers also participate in this thing called participation and planning. So participatory planning includes the people who will be affected by the plans or whose help's needed to implement them. So to create and implement the best plans, proper attention must be given to genuinely involving others during all planning steps. So, in organisations, when we're changing things, we consult. Apologies for my voice right now, I'm not entirely sure what's happening to it, but anyway, teeny tiny detail. So, participating in planning is all about involving people in this decision-making process. Because if I involve people and they feel like they have that decision power over whatever's happening to them, then they're more likely to enact it. Okay, so we build commitment to that plan. So if we're determining performance expectation, we're determining when things are due, so to speak, so where things stand vis-a-vis objectives. We then develop a premise regarding future conditions, we identify actions and we implement those. If we build that commitment, then it's not just one person, it's everyone's job. So planning on a whole is about how do we set performance objectives and determine what should be done to accomplish them. There are 5 steps. So there's define your objectives, determine where you stand, develop your premises regarding future conditions, identify and choose among alternatives, and implement the action and evaluate. We talked about short-term plans, long-term plans, the different types of plans, and the different types of planning tools, techniques, and processes. And these are really important because as an organisation, I can't tell you where I'm going to be if if I don't know how I'm going to get there. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you again soon.